Well, morning. I'm just about to tell you everything that happened. We commencing the 20th of May. Slightly different week last week overall. On the Monday the 20th, we had decided, or we'd arranged to take Mac, our oldest son, to the doctors. It's exam week for him, but he'd been in bed over the weekend, literally not even getting out of bed during the weekend. He'd been complaining that his sides were sore through all the coughing and stuff. He basically had a cold since about the Thursday, which we suspected possibly could have been flu, because didn't really have like heavy cold symptoms, but just literally just felt, properly wiped out. So we, with a lot of moaning, he decided that he would agree to go to the doctors. We tried to take him on the Sunday to the emergency walk-in clinic on the Sunday at Leighton Hospital, but he refused to go. He's not very keen to go to hospitals. It's not really his kind of thing. So anyway, we had an appointment pretty early on in the morning. I think it was, I don't know, maybe like about 9:30 or something like that, with the doctor who knows him pretty well. He walked to the doctors. We parked over the road, something like that. But to be honest, he actually needed support to get across the road. And when we sat down in the doctor's surgery, and then she started doing exams on him. She looked, you could pretty much tell straight away that there was a definite problem. She hooked him up to a machine, it's like put like a blood gas monitor on his finger, I think it was, or something along those lines. And the oxygen in his blood was a lot less than what it needed to be. Did the usual bit where she was tapping they tap the chest, they put the hand on it like that and tap. Seems very, very low tech, but basically, if you think that your lung is full of air, then it should almost like sound like a drum. And then when they're tapping on it and they can't hear anything, that means that obviously there's a problem there with his lungs. And she was like, he's going to need to go to hospital. He's going to have to go to Leighton to get some to be seen. He is really poorly. So sure enough, they called an ambulance straight away. I went back to get some bits and bobs went back home to get some bits and bobs for him. Drove back to the doctors, and he was funny enough, he was just about getting into the ambulance at that point. Went with him to the ambulance. We ended up at Leighton Hospital, and they got in there, took some bloods from him, and he was in. They didn't basically. He wasn't in the. He was in like a children's ward at first. He wasn't in the normal ward for very long, and then they moved him into the high dependency unit, so they could keep him under closer monitors. So they had all kinds of like lines running into him, into his veins and stuff like that. And also had the heart monitor. He was constantly on oxygen at this point all the time. So the test came back, and they measure something. His blood test came back, and they measure something called they have a CRP, I think, test, and that basically measures the amount of infection there is in the blood. Measures things like white blood cell count and stuff like that. You would normally have between 10 to 50 just as a normal kind of gauge. If you have something like a cold or something like that, you might be going up to like 100 to 150. Max levels of infection were actually at 360. His heart at some point was really racing. It was going at 200, and at some points it was going at over 200, 220, which is like really racing, really high. But that was to do with his temperature. So they put him pretty much straight away on IV drip, which is basically a paracetamol IV drip. They put another drip in for him to get fluids into him, as in liquids. And he was like constantly on. He was on 10 litres of the masks were putting around 10 litres of oxygen into his lungs. So basically, it wasn't because one of his lungs wasn't functioning, had an infection on it. Basically, it was pneumonia. It meant that there was only one lung actually working, and that was the reason why his blood count, the oxygen in his blood, was dropping down to, I think it was something in the regions of the 80s, and really you want like 100%, 100% oxygen in your blood, or certainly above 95, and yeah, basically it wasn't getting enough oxygen in his blood. So Tuesday, when did I went into the hospital again, and it was kind of like more of just like really like sitting down and them doing more tests on him. He had another blood test. Again, his CRP number had gone down to about 292 or something along those lines. They'd done some more X-rays on him. In fact, sorry, they'd done the X-ray the previous day. I took a little. I've got like a little tiny tablet, a little Microsoft Surface thing, so I was able to just keep answering my emails and something like that, because there's not really much you can do. Mac's conversation were as much as kind of like yes, no, and to be pretty blunt, they were pretty short. Wednesday, Mac had pretty much a decent night's sleep. His vitals were looking better in terms of the amount of, they were able to turn down his oxygen to about 6 litres, something along those lines, which is still a lot. I don't think I realised at the time 6 litres just sounded pretty much normal to me, but it turns out it wasn't. I think the main problem for Mac really was his temperatures, in terms of him feeling poorly. So obviously as your body's fighting infections, then it increases its heart rate, increases its temperature, and he was allowed the IV paracetamol drips come in every 6 hours. But in the interim, when it gets to about towards that amount of time, they were having to give him ibuprofen as well, which means that then he has to eat, and then he's not eating very much because he just doesn't really feel like it. He had physios coming around trying to get him to move in his bed and trying to get him to cough more. Everybody keeps tapping on his lungs to try and listen to the sound. No real massive improvements. Maybe his vitals seem to be getting a little bit better. There are some times where his pulse is like dropping back down to more like under 100, which is good, because most of the times the most it was dropping down to was like 100, 150 when we first got him on the Monday. On the Thursday, they actually got Mac out of his bed, begrudgingly didn't really want to move, and in fact the nurse and the physiotherapist actually got him to walk to the loo, try and get him to a bit more mobile, because he was having to use these, these cardboard bottles that you wee into. He's still kind of refusing to cough up any any gunk. Again, this is on the Thursday. Thursday was when Wend had gone into work on Thursday, because it was actually Bev, who's been with us for the longest time, our kind of like first proper employee. It was her seventh anniversary. She'd worked for us for 7 years. Like to think, and so Wend had gone into work in the morning just to surprise her, to give her some, I think it was possibly, bringing some treats, donuts and what have you, for everybody to share. We try and make a fuss of people, or definitely acknowledge when they've passed like an annual, I don't know, call them work anniversaries if you want to call them that. I'd send to some messages, some emails. Tending to email everybody in the morning, just give them the normal 7-day updates, and also send them a Mac update, because we're getting lots of people who are asking how he is and want to try and keep on top of his progress. But yeah, Bev's been through obviously we've been through 7 years. He's seen the company grow from it just being just initially just the two of us, just me and Bev at the start. Bev was originally brought on to work on the water side of the account, and just to help chase up potential lines of inquiries and orders, and people who'd rung up and trying to convert them into orders. But soon realised that Bev was, I realised quite early on that understanding the cash flow on when people were paying bills and when we needed to pay money out, and paying suppliers was quite an onerous task, and one that I was doing it on a Sunday. Usually after I'd usually have to pour myself a drink of whiskey, and that's not necessarily paying suppliers and putting data into Sage when you're having to pour yourself a whiskey to give yourself the encouragement to be able to do the paperwork is probably not a good thing. So Bev quite early transitioned from being on sales on water to inputting the data and the finances. And in the early days we did have a laugh, because I would quite often would set off doing things in one way, and then like a couple of days later I'd go, right, okay, forget what I've told you on this other day, we're going to do it like this. 7 years feels like a long time in some ways, and in other ways it doesn't feel like that long. Bev's also seen us move from working here to working in the business centre, and then moving from office to office into bigger offices, and seen us have times where literally we've been that stretched on cash flow that we've literally been juggling and stretching people out, and being really careful and waiting for money in to then pay money out. And we've been through some real tough times. There's been tears, and Bev does take it on probably more so than anybody else in terms of the health of certainly the health of the company, and she's also been incredibly supportive for me and Wen through the journey that we've been on as well. So yeah, I think I put in a text or an email, something like that she's a rock. She has been a rock for us, really has been a true rock for us, and she's also a star, so that technically does make Bev she's a rock star for us on that basis. And yeah, it's funny, I think it's one of those ones that even when you look and you play out and you go, okay, well, what happens if everything went completely wrong, and the business just, we needed to shrink the business down to literally the core bare bones of the business. The actual irony is that if it came down to it, it would only just be myself and probably, myself and Bev, and probably Wend, that would still work for the business, because then, I don't know, we'd have to kind of pivot into some kind of consultancy, I guess, or something along those lines. So, in terms of if there ever was a job for life, I think that's the closest thing we've probably got at 24/7, because obviously there's never any guarantees of what's going to happen to your business long term, on the economy and everything else. So Bev, we salute you and thank you for everything you've done for us for the past 7 years, and it is looking positively onto the future. Mac, going back to Mac, it is all pretty much about Mac at the minute. It is a difficult one to really comprehend and what have you. Mac's such a, to put it into context for Mac, he's probably, I would imagine he's probably stronger than me now. He goes to the gym 3 times a week. He's been a runner. He's done like running in the past. He's like super fit. He's got like a 6-pack at the age of, I think from the age of like about 12 he's had a 6-pack. He's always been physically strong. He's he's never had a single day off school since primary school. I think before that point, before he went to school, he had about a couple of days in hospital when he was about 2 years old, something along those lines, with when he was diagnosed with asthma. And even then he was jumping up and down on the bed because he was a happy wheezer. So that means he's not aware that he's taking the short breaths that he's taking. He just kind of like continues on like that. That's normal, but that's not a good thing to do. So although he's asthmatic and he has to have his aspirin inhaler with him every day, it certainly hasn't stopped him. He's been, fast for running, fast for swimming. Ironically, he reckoned he was going to be, this was the other thing, he said, I'm brilliant with football, running with the football, but other than that, it's just a shame that he doesn't actually have any ball control skills, because he's very, very quick, but he's got actually no footballing brain or anything like that for that kind of thing. This week's seen some exams for him which he's had to miss, which he's not been very happy about. Although he plays on, he loves playing on his Xbox, plays loads of games and what have you, he also studies really hard. So he's down here when he's having his dinner and he's studying. He's gone from being a student that was pretty lazy when he first started secondary school to really applying himself, and that's been reflected in his grades and how his teachers think about him. And he's done really, really well. So to see that he's now missing the exams at this crucial point in time, his final year of GCSEs, he just feels so bad for him, really, just really, really bad. So anyway, Friday was an interesting day. We had loads of people off. It was actually Vonnie, who's she's not our oldest, but our second oldest. She's in her early 60s, shall we say. No, it's not good to give away a lady's age, but she was marrying Roger, who's one of our Vonnie and Wendy, part of a group of ladies, or there's a big group of ladies, and Vonnie's part of that friendship circle kind of thing. So she is, not only does she work for us, she's also like a very close family friend. So there's a lot of prep to do for that day for Vonnies Wedding. We had loads of people taking flexi time off to get haircut and nails done and prepping. Some people actually even went to the wedding during the day. I was meant to go to the wedding during the day, but I decided that I wanted to just basically spend time, give Mac, just be there for him for company. Can't exactly do very much other than occasionally help his tissues, if get the tissues of stuff that he's coughing out, hold, spoon feed him jelly and ice cream and that kind of thing. Just do the basics. But I think sometimes he just needs to know that he's got just somebody there for support with him. If he needs something, there's somebody there. If he asks for something, there's somebody there directly on hand. I mean, the nurses in Leighton and the doctors have been fantastic. Couldn't have really asked for more from them. They've been so caring, especially when he's been quite grumpy because of the pain and discomfort he's been in. But he's been they've been really, really good. Like the girls there, a lot of them are working 12-hour shifts 2-3 days a week, and I know now, obviously, with the research that I've done, that that's not good for you. It's not good for you in terms of your body or anything like that. Working these shift works is really, really tough and really demanding. It's not an easy. I don't class it as an easy job for them. Yes, there are times when they need to stand around and just discuss, and they're just waiting. They can't literally stand by his bed like all the time, because that's just going to annoy Mac and he's just going to get even more frustrated. And there are times when they're going to have more people in the beds. We'll just look at the moment that certainly in the hospital and the children's ward, there's not actually that many kids that are in there. So Mac is probably probably the sickest person who's in the children's bed of it at the minute. In fact, he definitely is. On the Friday, Sherry came round later on to visit Mac, just to help me get away a little bit earlier. Mac had another X-ray on his chest on around 6 o'clock. He'd also had an ultrasound about 1 o'clock, so he'd actually got we got him into a wheelchair, which meant that he could stand up and go to the loo himself, which is pretty good. And also means he got out of his room for a bit. When we took him down, the ultrasound, instead of it being done in his bed, was done in like the ultrasound, another part of the hospital where they sit down and they've got like an ultrasound table. I don't know, it must be a bigger machine or something along those lines. So they took the results. I mean, it is a bit of a balming one. I've never really understood the ultrasound picture that you see on the screen. When you go and have a look for when somebody's pregnant, what have you, and you can see the fetus and what have you. I've always found it pretty difficult to spot what bit of it's what. I don't know, I just can't really see those kind of things. The results of the ultrasound when they came in, when I saw the doctors later on, the fluid around his lung had increased from 2 centimetres in depth on the Monday to 3, which means that the antibiotics that he'd been on hadn't been working, so hadn't done the trick that they were hoping for. It's pretty difficult, really, because although they're pumping all these antibiotics into him, they have to get through this 2 centimetres. They've got to get through that kind of gunk to be able to treat the infection in the lung itself. And if they don't do that, then the fluid or the pus that's around the lung can actually create what's like an abscess, like an open wound, and then that's going to make him even more poorly. It's a bit of a bonkers thing, really. It only really occurred to me pretty much late on that, if they weren't able to do all these X-rays and stuff, that if we'd been I don't know, 50 years ago, something along those lines, then this whole situation with Mac would have been a whole heck of a lot worse, because they wouldn't have had the ability to be able to do all these things like the ultrasounds and the high strength antibiotics in the same way. And it would have been from him being in a situation where he is critically ill. It could have quite conceivably been something that could have ended his life. We brush over it, to some way he seems pretty normal. He's just sat there in bed, he's watching his phone, that kind of thing. And sometimes you just kind of like ignore the fact of just how poorly he is. I went to the Vonnies Wedding in the evening. The evening dude got there, I don't know, probably about 8 o'clock, something like that, 8:30, something like that. It was really nice to see a lot of people from work, all just hanging out together, drinking, chatting, just socialising, having a good time. Good, like, kind of, you could call it team bonded if you want to call it like that. It's great to see Jake Johnson, who comes over. He came down on the train. He lives more Chester way, so he'd made the effort to come down. A couple of girls who had got a family room together in the place that we're staying, so that they could stop over, because one of the girls, Ella, she lives in Warrington, so she was stopping with Kat. Everyone was drinking, having fun, dancing around, and Sherry and Mick came over, because Sherry took over for me at the hospital. We've had a massive amount of help from everybody, really. We've had so much help and support, people asking about Mac. I think most of the time when he's been on Facebook, just kind of updating people on his situation. People have come down, helped walk dogs, look after Brody, our son. We actually do have 2 sons. It feels like at the moment we can only really focus on one. But we've had support, so much support, and so much offers of support, of help. Quite overwhelming, really. Makes me appreciate the circle of friends that the quality, not just the circle of friends that we've got, but also the quality of them, and what they're willing to do, what they'd be willing to do for us. On the Saturday morning, I rang the ward, as they normally do early on when I get up around 6 or 7 o'clock or something along those lines. And it was kind of a different tone of voice. It seemed a lot more serious, like, who are you? We can't really discuss much on the phone, that kind of thing. So I was like, this doesn't feel that good. When I arrived, I kind of just said to the nurse who was with him, so I take it this isn't really good, with him growing from, although they glossed over it and they went, oh yeah, his fluid around his lungs increased a little bit, so it's gone from 2 to 3 centimetres. It doesn't sound that much, but if you look at it in percentage terms, we are talking that's a 50% increase in the gunk and the build-up around his lung. And that's not the way you want the antibiotics to be going in a different direction. In fact, later on Friday, they swapped his antibiotics from one kind to another kind, which was then to start treating not so much the lung itself, but to work on breaking down the infection that was around, or the gunk that's around his lung. So on the Saturday, they then confirmed that what they wanted to do was, they'd looked at the x-ray and things were getting worse, and they decided that the only way to get the lung infection and the pneumonia under control was to go and put a drain in, which meant that they had to transfer him to Alder Hey Hospital in Liverpool, which is probably about 40-minute drive from our house. And so found that out probably about 10:30, and then we had to wait around for a while. So I stayed at the hospital when wanted to come in, but I had to wait because it was one of those ones where there's no point in driving here and then us both all driving to Liverpool. So we decided for when to just prep and get stuff together, and for just to wait for the ambulance that came around 3 o'clock on the Saturday. Brody went to stop over at his friend's house a little bit further down the road, a guy called Alfie, so they decided to look after him for us, which was handy, took the pressure off us. Dogs were being looked after by Sherry and Mick in terms of taking them out for walks and stuff. So got to I headed off around the same time as Matt was going to the ambulance, picked Wend up, got some other stuff together, and then we headed off to the ward at Alder Hey. Got there, we arrived there around the same time as Mac. When Mac arrives at Alder Hey, everybody gets assessed when they're in the A&E ward, or that's where they do the first kind of like assessments of them as they're being inducted into Alder Hey as a patient. So we actually they got Mac in so not so much on a ward, but again like a private. It's not so much. Yeah, it's kind of like not so much a high dependency unit, but it is a room where there's just him, and he has an ensuite of his own. So it's kind of like a bigger room. There's a bed that you can sit on, and parents can sleep on there in the bed. So yeah, we went down, they assessed him, took him up to the ward. They explained, the consultant who was in there, this is on the Saturday, she'd been monitoring him, or they'd been monitoring him remotely in terms of his case. They then decided that the only way for him to do was to put a drain, which is kind of like a plastic tube, probably about that diameter, I don't know if you can see, quite a small diameter, in his side. It's got a bit of a curl on it, has like holes in the curl, and that's all the fluid seeps into them, and then just literally seeps out down a tube into a pot. So bearing in mind this is the weekend, they really don't do like elective work, as in they don't decide to do any work over the weekend unless it's an emergency. And emergencies are a little bit of a funny one, so that they don't really so much schedule where they were at in terms of a time, because they can't predict. They have people, children being flown into the hospital at all hours in all kinds of conditions and of illness, and then they just have to prioritise them in terms of who needs going for now in the best will in the world. But although Mac is poorly, he's under control, he's getting oxygen, his condition's stable per se, in terms of his vital signs, his pulse, his blood and his blood pressure, although all those ones are, you say he's stable when he's getting all the meds and he's getting the oxygen and whatever, it's under control. Obviously if they took all those off him, then he would go downhill rapidly, and would probably be in a situation where he'd be having organ failure, etc. So they, when he got him up to his ward, he was pretty happy because he had a big television in his room, and he's been on he's just had his mobile phone to entertain him up until this point. So having a television back again was a positive thing for him. And they came in, they said that basically the plan was the usual things of tapping his chest and listening and what have you, and they just said, look, you know, we are going to try and get you in to get you worked on tonight. As it happens, I was pretty lucky that one of the things for surgery is they were asking when's the last time you had anything to eat, and he'd had quite a few Percy pigs that my mum and dad had brought for him, and I'd made a note. I sent him a text. I don't normally do these kind of things. I sent him a text telling him that he'd been munching away on the Percy pigs. So on that basis, I knew exactly the last thing he'd had and when, because I sent the text, and they had to leave like 6 hours between the last part of food that he'd had, or substantial food that he'd had, or something to eat, to when they could operate on him. So that had to be after 9 o'clock. He finally went down into surgery for 12 after he'd had visits from the anaesthetist, which was worried about waking up, and they'd reassured him. And from there, he'd actually had a visit from the surgeons themselves, and they were all really great. Nothing was too much trouble. Answered all the questions that he had. We both went down with him to the bit before he goes under. We decided that because it was pretty upsetting for Wend, and that it meant that we decided that because obviously emotions were getting to Wend, she was crying over it, that it would be better for me to go with him into the room where they actually give him where they put him to sleep under the anaesthetic, so I could be with him there. And there's a couple of ways you could look at it. You could say that I think Wend had been, like, sad that it's got to this point that, he was obviously getting poorly, and Wend was worried about that. Whereas I was looking at that, it's like, okay, so yeah, he's poorly, but now we're taking an action, we're going to do something different, we're going to put a drain into him, we're going to get all the gunk out of this lining around the lung, this pocket around the lung, and then that he's not going to get better until that's gone, until they've got rid of it. So for me, getting him in and getting him operated is a step in the right direction. In terms of getting him on the road to recovery. If you look at the odds of something happened to him when he was in the operation, it's a very, very, comparatively minor procedure. He's probably at more danger when he's actually going from Leighton Hospital to Alder Hey in the actual ambulance. He's probably in more danger there than he is of anything going wrong in the actual op itself. And he came. It wasn't that long. I think we then moved down into from the room we'd been into a waiting room in high dependency in Alder Hey. So that's kind of like, again, a similar one to Leighton, but a heck of a lot more high tech. It was more of a definite clinical room with loads of monitors and like stations. There was like a station at the end of the bed. There was like stations with lines and all kinds of monitors on either side of the bed. A lot more intensive, if you want to call it like that. Alder Hey facilities there are, they really are amazing. And they put us in a room, in a parent room that had a bed in it, an ensuite and all the rest of it. So when we got Mac out of, when we were waiting for Mac, we were able to kind of like sit on the bed and just wait for him in there. I listened to some podcasts to pass the time, and then he came out, I think it was like 2 o'clock in the morning, something along those lines, and that 2:30 when went down to get him out of the high dependency unit. And he was fine. Everything he'd gone. He was still completely woozy, but you could see already that there was already gunk coming out of the drain for him. So there wasn't really very much more we could do other than get some sleep at that point. And so that was probably about 2:30, something along those lines. Mac came round about, I think it was about 6:30 the following morning. So literally all they did was came on and knocked on the door. We got out of bed and went directly through to see him. Yeah, I mean, he was still completely groggy. Yeah, that was really just pretty much it. They were just draining out. Then it was just a question of then just keeping him on the meds, keeping his temperature under control. He was needing more morphine at that point for the pain, just to keep his pain managed and under control. And by the end of the Sunday, they had transferred him out of the high dependency unit back onto a ward in a very monitored way. So not a normal ward. He's got his own room with a sofa, kind of like a sofa bed, television, ensuite, that kind of thing. Still being monitored by the nursing staff. I think by the time we'd moved up there, they'd probably got about 1.2 litres worth of gunk. It looks all kinds of weird colours, like green, looked like pea soup really, and sediments, and just cack off his lungs, and it was still just kept on flowing out again, just more and more of it. We were getting some break times from time to time. I've still took my laptop along with me just for as much something to keep my mind occupied. Got rid of quite a bit of stuff to do with like filing and what have you, and answering client emails as much as I can off my phone or off my laptop. But at the moment, obviously the priorities have to, at this point, they have to be like your family has to come first. And again, we've lent so much on our circle of friends, even people who've been having, Reiki, which is kind of like this thing where they do with stones. People have been going to church to pray for Mac for a speedy recovery for him. Messaging all the time. Just really blown away with the support and kind messages that we've had off everybody. And so Sunday also they managed to get him off the mask, the oxygen mask, onto having prongs back up in his nose. That's where you have like a tube that go around with tubes up his nose. And he went to bed about 10 p.m, something along those lines. We headed off and came back home. Got home for about 11, and we were literally completely jiggered at that particular point in time. Although it is a bit bonkers how you can do nothing but just literally wait around and still be feeling tired. I can only assume it's probably the stress of it that's probably tiring us out. We're not doing anything, we're just literally going down and eating here and eating chocolate bars and what have you, and just really just getting through just hour by hour, on a day by day basis. And just thanks to everybody for all the kind support, and thanks to people like Archie's mum and dad who have Brody stopping over there for a couple of days, and that just gives everybody a bit more breathing space. So yeah, till next week. and hopefully come the end of next week we'll have a more positive tale to tell, and hopefully with it being half term next week that Matt can be getting to the point where he can be looking to potentially be better, or looking to be thinking about leaving Alder Hey Hospital, or at least be in a situation where he can do the remainder of his exams in a controlled environment from hospital as well. So yeah, thanks for listening. All right, till next week.